Lauren and I are so glad because if you're here, it tells us that you love talking shift as much as we do. So I think we should just dive right into it, Lauren. What kind of shift talk is on your mind today?
I was gonna say I have so much shift in my life. I'm practically swimming in it, Lori.
Yeah, I know. It's a fun word. We could totally overdo this all day. So,
We definitely could. It's fun. I actually do it like in my spare time. Like, how can I do this? I was having a chat, Lori, with my children because
mm,
they are not so good with the code words for the ugly lingo. And I'm trying to figure out what are we doing about kids who cuss? They're 9
mm,
years old. It's not like they haven't heard it before,
yeah.
but I'm just perplexed. Who are these people and why are they calling each other assholes?
Wow. Well, yes, that is a really good question. I do not recall hearing a cuss word ever come out of my kids' mouths when they were 9. I mean, are you, are your kids using that with each other or other
It's not
people?
a regular thing, I will say that, but it's more regular than I'm comfortable with. And much like your children, if I had cursed in front of my parents, I would have perished off this earth. As an adult, I don't curse in front of my parents. And so for them to have the audacity, I'm just like, who are you? But also, I love that you're, strong, independent thinkers, but let's be respectful about it.
Well, yeah, there's a line. You can be a strong and independent thinker, but that doesn't mean at age 9 you have the authority to start, using whatever language you want and behavior you want. You're still a kid, and you still need to learn, what's respectful, and that's your job as the parent, right? So, I guess number one, I think it's harder these days because you hear a lot more of that kind of right on the edge languaging, even in children's, animated movies and
Yes.
shows. They have taken a lot of liberties with that. And, I guess part of it is changing of the times and things get a lot more relaxed, which is not necessarily a good thing in every respect. But also, I think the motivation is to engage the adults watching along with the kids a little bit
Right.
more.
And we
Um,
appreciate that
but
sometimes.
yeah, but still, it gives license to the kids to mimic that.
Mhm.
So you see a lot, and this has been kind of a pet peeve of mine, literally since watching the animated movies that have come out for kids over these last couple of decades, is the level of snarkiness and disrespect and really unacceptable behavior that you see being projected from what are supposed to be the kids on the shows is at a level that I think is really unacceptable. I wouldn't allow that kind of behavior in my home, mini tantrums and bad language and talking back and just the snarkiness. I think it's a bad setting a bad example. But when they see it just like they're watching their parents at home, and then that's what they model. So if you're finding if you are not realizing you're using the language at home and they're picking up on it, that's the first place to start, right? Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. It's not that I don't realize it. I think I'm an adult and I pay the bills around here and
Mhm.
I don't have a foul mouth. I'm not over here, cussing every day of the week. But, if I step on your Lego and I say, damn, or pick up these dang Lego,
Right.
I'm entitled. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I have a hard time with this. I really do. You're right. Some of the things that we think are children's shows really do need to be monitored. And then I think some of the shows that are not portrayed as children's shows, but we watch them as a family, my kids know this isn't entirely appropriate. So I still kind of need to be minding my manners on these things. It's really an interesting point you bring up. I didn't even consider, but yeah, they probably
Mhm.
are desensitized to some extent based on
Yeah.
what they're consuming.
Oh, totally. And I've really gotten a fresh dose of this the last year or two, because when I spend time with our now little over 3-year-old grandson, and if it's time to maybe have a little chill time from playing or whatever, and we want to turn on a show for him, I've really noticed that some of these shows, cartoons that are really popular, I'm
Hmm.
looking at this and I'm like, that's awful. That's just not the kind of behavior I would want my child to model. And you can see it happening when there's a level of frustration or something with him, our grandson, for instance. I can see that he's doing exactly what they do in the cartoon. So, they're kids are sponges. They are picking up everything they see, and they're modeling it. So, it's you really have to be mindful of your own languaging. And if you are going to be, using certain words that you don't think are appropriate for your kids, then you kind of have you're going to be a little bit of a hypocrite, sure, but if that's your choice, and I'm not saying it's a bad choice. I didn't have perfect languaging either, but you still have to lay down the law. It's just like, well, okay, if mom and dad are going to have a glass of wine on Friday night, no, it's not appropriate for you when you're 9. And
Right.
it's kind of the same for language. It's not appropriate for you. Mom and dad might say it, and it's not the greatest, but when you're 18, then you can speak how you want. But right now, no. That's just, you have rules. That's just
Absolutely. Yeah, that brings up another point though, and that it's kind of our topic for today is the way that parents are raising their children, and if they're basing that on the values their own parents had, or if we're kind of adapting to the times, so to speak, or what that looks like for different types of families. And I actually was speaking to some of my girlfriends. I have one friend whose kids are older than mine, and she said that she allowed her children to start saying ugly words in her house about the age that mine are, and she said she absolutely regrets it. She shouldn't have done it, and she's trying to rein that back in because one of them has gotten in trouble at school because it just slips out when it's something that's a regular part of your vocabulary.
right.
Sometimes it's harder to control in those less appropriate places. But
Yeah.
she actually did not have quite the same parental guidance in her life that I did, and so
Mm.
she is kind of figuring things out from almost a clean slate, versus I had a certain type of upbringing and I'm having to pick and choose which parts of that I want to employ in my parenting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and her situation is a prime example of the other place your child is picking up on the languaging from other kids.
Mm,
So, there, even if you aren't speaking like that at home, they're hearing it at school, right? And they're hearing it in some of the things that they watch. So it is a bit like sweeping back the tide, but that's just where we're back to communicating and letting them know what the rules are at your house. And they will be free to do those things when they're older, but not now. So, it's just, who's the authority here?
that's right. And we've had conversations, my kids and I will say things. I feel like this is just a phrase in my regular vernacular. Well, I'll say like, I'd rather die than do that." I have
Oh,
to tell my kids when I hear a child say that, I'm like, never, ever, ever say that at school. Like, never, because they take these things very seriously.
yep,
So,
yep.
I'm trying to delineate with my kids, like, this is where it's okay to say certain things because you think it's funny or whatever. It contributes to the conversation in some way. But also, these are not always things that we can say to your friends or in front of,
Yeah.
people at school.
Yeah. It's, your kids are, they really can be your greatest teachers if you will allow it. Because
They will
that
humble you
example,
quick, Lori.
right. That example right there is really powerful. If you have a habit of saying something as dramatic as "I would rather die"
I'd rather
than
pass away than do the laundry today, Lori.
yeah. So what are you communicating to them? That's, it's you're making something so big and dramatic out of something that is really inconsequential in the big scheme of things. So I think, Lauren, maybe that's something you might want to remind yourself of. Maybe like, what are you teaching them? That doing the laundry is the most awful, horrific thing on the planet? Or, wow, how fortunate are we that we have a machine that actually does all the work? And we only have to dump it in and push a button, and then, a quick 5 minutes to put things away. So let's keep things in perspective here.
I
But
love your outlook. I really do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I can see how that would be a thing if it was still the days where you had to grab your laundry and a bar of soap and a washboard and head down to the river a half a mile away and start scrubbing away and then laying all of your clothes out on rocks in the sun to dry. You know, I might say that too then. However, we live in a different day and time. So, just something to think about.
Speaking of which, my mother did all the laundry in our home, and maybe that's why it's such a dreaded chore for me
Mm,
now is, should I be
mm.
teaching my kids and instilling in them, this is responsibility that we all share in this household. I just don't feel that way though. Where are you on that one?
Well, my kids learned to do their own laundry. I mean, my sister and I were doing our own laundry when we were, I don't know, maybe not quite as young as 9, but certainly by the time we were young teenagers, we were doing not only our own laundry, but my mom worked. We were helping do hers too. So, at 9 years old, you're capable of doing the laundry. A 9-year old, if you spent an hour with them, could learn how to drive a car. You could certainly learn how to do the laundry. And I think when it comes to, the chores and the tasks that contribute to just the functioning of the family, there is zero reason why you shouldn't be teaching your kids how to do the laundry, how to sort them so that, you don't put something red in with your white clothes unless you want them all to be pink. And you push these buttons and then you walk away until it beeps and tells you, okay, now put them in the dryer. And then you put your damn clothes away, right? That's just called taking, not only personal responsibility for things that you need, like your clean clothes, and it's also contributing to the family. So they should be. I think kids should be learning that stuff, and 9 is a perfect age to start. Also, and it's the same thing with cooking and cleaning up and putting the dishes away. I mean, dusting and vacuuming. I grew up having to contribute and do those things, and I'm really glad because it teaches you that you are part of you're part of a whole unit. It's not just you floating around out there and expecting everyone to do things for you and you get to skate by doing as little as possible. That's not a good way to grow up. That's a weakness. So I think that as things become age appropriate for your kids, chores, tasks, things that contribute to the running of the household, then absolutely you should be instilling those and giving them, little things to do. Start out small and whatever. But yeah, so, we all grew up a little differently. And you say, things are a little, how is it now with, if you have different values and different ways of doing things than your parents? So I don't know. I keep it simple. Take the best and discard the rest.
Mhm.
So a really, I guess a good example is people that grew up as, with parents who had the mindset of clean your plate, clean plate club, right? So clean your plate because there's starving kids in other parts of the world. And somehow if you eat every morsel on your plate, it's just going to be better for them. Right. So, so like we had cousins that were part of that club. My parents were not part of that club. So you ate until you were full and then you stopped eating, which I think is a much better value system than eat everything on your plate, whether you want it or not. Even if you're full, you finish it. So you have to decide what's the message you're trying to sell to your kids. What do and it is kind of selling. You're selling them something. And how is that going to play out as they get older? Yeah, so I don't know. Are your kids spending a lot of time with relatives or parents where this is a concern for you?
Well, we don't live near my parents or their other grandparents, so I wouldn't say that it's a concern. But I do feel like I am open to criticism at all times when we do visit,
Mm.
just because other people parented their children differently.
Hmm.
And I want to be really clear about this. My childhood was excellent. My parents were wonderful people and wonderful parents. And, I struggle to point out anything that they did wrong. However, there are some things that I'm going to do differently. And one of the big things when we're talking about chores, my dad took a really hard stance on you have your whole life to work, you have your whole life to be responsible. So we did nothing to contribute to our household. And he was also very firm on school is your job. And
Hmm.
that's where we put our focus was he wanted to make sure we were doing our very best at school. But for the most part, my parents just really gave us license to be children. And
Hmm.
I loved that. However, I I didn't do laundry until I was in college. And there were still people, in my freshman dorm who were saving their laundry for weeks at a time to carry it back home and let mom do it for them. And I'm like,
Hmm.
we're adults now. So I do want to avoid some of those things with my kids.
Yeah. Well, and that's fair. I mean, you have to choose the value system, I guess, that you feel good about. Um, and I think that there's things that should fall, within reason. Obviously, especially when you have kids that are, if you are going to school, regular school hours, and then a lot of kids have after school activities and they have homework. So there's only so much time in the day, which I get. So I would say if you were going to assign a few tasks that contribute to the household, I think you can still do that, but maybe it's just something a little bit smaller on the weekend or when there's time. But certainly, I think overscheduling kids to any degree is a mistake because I do agree they have to have just time to be a kid. And people have a tendency, I think, these days to really overschedule their kids. So I'm down with that too. But I think that there's always room where they can understand that there's a little bit that they can contribute. It's kind of funny because my because Eric is gotten into this habit the last, I guess, really few months of doing the dishes. We kind of, it's just the two of us here, so we don't use our dishwasher that much. We just kind of do things as we use them. We wash as we go. And I have a massive aversion to seeing dirty dishes in my sink or on my counter. I don't like it. I'm an everything in its place person. So dishes don't pile up. As soon as they're done with, they're cleaned and put in the dish rack to dry and be put away. So anyway, he has gotten into this habit of starting to take over that task when he's home, to the point where if he sees me start to pick up a dish, he's like, nope, nope. And he goes running in there to run interference. It's my job now. And I'm like, what has gotten into you? And
I love
he,
this for you, Loree.
right. And because a lot of times, I find doing dishes, my sink is in front of the window. I look up or toward Yellowstone Park. It's a beautiful view. It's very therapeutic. And now he's honing in on my therapy. And I'm like, what's gotten into you? And he's like, you know what? I realized that I grew up every day watching my mom do dishes for us three kids and my dad. Nobody ever offered to lift a finger to help her. She did it all the time. And now he's having he's got a conscious awareness about that has begun to, it's sunk in and it bothers him. And
Oh.
so he said, this is my way of making up to my mom that I never lifted a finger to help her when we were kids at home. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective. So there's a lot there's a lot going on with doing the dishes in my house. But I'm like, okay, fair enough, I get it. But every now and then you're going to have to let me wash a dish because I enjoy it to a degree.
I
So,
was gonna say, I love that the two of you are fighting over who gets the privilege of doing
right.
the dishes.
That's what I
That's not a
told him.
problem in my home.
No, I started laughing. We had this discussion again yesterday, and I said, it's kind of funny that most people, I think, especially people, we've been together for many, many decades. And I said, how many people that have been together, especially for as long as we have, are having this kind of, not an argument, just a discussion about who gets to do the dishes. It's probably pretty opposite than your typical couple. Anyway, I digress. I don't even know where we left off, but
That's very sweet. No, my 9-year-olds are not doing the dishes, but you've finally gotten your spouse of many decades to do the dishes. So,
and I wasn't really even
no,
trying.
it
I
doesn't
mean,
sound like it.
right? So
I love this.
there we go.
Well, regarding older children, we'll get
Mhm,
back to children
mhm,
and some of the things, that we might be doing differently than our parents did. This is another thing that kind of came up in my chit chat with a couple of girlfriends. There was no alcohol in our home when I was a kid. My parents never had a beer or a glass of
mhm.
wine. This was completely, they didn't order it at restaurants. It was never, never, ever. And I had a friend who was the same in college, where her parents, I think theirs was more of a religious thing, but there was never any alcohol in their home. And she drank a lot freshman year. And there was kind of some conversation at the time of, is this like because it's a first time exposure? What leads to this? So fast forward, now I'm a parent and having these conversations with other parent friends, and we're talking about, do you allow your kids to see you indulge in a glass of wine? Are you trying to protect them from the dangers of alcohol so that they keep those values? Or is there a possibility that they need to be more, familiar with drinking and alcohol before they're on their own? How do you feel about this?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if there's any one right answer. I don't think that there is. There's so many variables there. But I don't know. I mean, my parents didn't not drink, but it wasn't a regular part. I don't recall actually ever seeing my mom have a drink until I was a teenager, and then it was pretty rare. Um, my dad was one of those guys growing up as a kid that he would have a few beers. He would have a few beers on occasion, and he was a softball player, so the guys would go to the bar and have beers, and he would go to the bar occasionally and have a couple beers.
How did you perceive that as a child?
Well, because you're a child and that's what you see, it's
Mhm.
normal. It becomes the norm, right?
Right. I never saw it. So there was this one time we went to a restaurant and I saw a teacher from my school having a beer at her table with her husband, and it was shocking and almost scary for me. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So it just really, yeah, it depends on what you're exposed to. Um, so, we were not exposed to excessive drinking or over drinking when we were kids. Now, by the time I'm 16 and I can drive, and me and my friend are now have the independence of going to the inevitable parties and keggers that kids are going to start throwing when you're that age. We were absolutely out on Friday and Saturday nights going to keggers and drinking beer and bringing stuff to make daiquiris. so, so, I don't know. Would it have been any different had there been more drinking or zero drinking in my household? I have no idea. I don't even know. But there are the scenarios that you hear about all the time where kids grow up and there's been, no alcohol or no sugar or no something super strict to the extreme. And then once they get out on their own, they kind of go bananas and want to experience all of that. There are those scenarios. Then you have the ones that kind of carry on the tradition that they were brought up with and they just don't incorporate that into their lives. And those variables are, countless. So I don't know what's better, what's not. What I do think is, having the mindset of either allowing, I guess, your underage kids to drink in your house on a regular basis under the assumption that, well, they're safer doing it here than out there. There's really no evidence to back that up, number one. Number two, again, you kind of have to weigh that with what kind of a norm are you setting for them? I did read that article that a lot of parents slipped into the habit of during the pandemic, when everyone sort of went a little cuckoo at home and started binging on everything from ice cream to alcohol to Netflix to, exercising. And amongst those things, it said that many started allowing their underage kids to have some drinks even with them. That's a little, I don't think that's a good idea. I think
That's another one that as an adult, I still don't want to drink with my parents. I just don't. We may be out by the pool and maybe a White Claw for each of us, but I'm done at that. I want nothing to do with that. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have an 18-year-old, for example, that's still living at home, I think by the time you're 18 and you're old enough to enlist and go to war, I think if you want to have a glass of wine on occasion with dinner or a beer while you're watching a movie at home, I would be much more open to some leniency there, because I think at age 18, when when you can vote and go to war, I would say, for me anyway, I wouldn't be quite so extremely strict about that. But yeah, beyond that, I just think, special occasions and within limits, I would consider that by about age 18. But beyond that, younger kids, I think you just have to be really mindful about how you're going to do that. And I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way. I can only speak for my own experience. And, we were pretty chill with our kids. Our daughter was not really too interested in doing much of that type of partying. Our son was, so I know without a doubt he was out with his friends under that age, doing exactly what I did when I was that age. So, our thing was, look, if you ever get into a situation where this is what you're doing, then just don't drive, call us. We'd prefer that you don't, but if you're going to, and we knew they would, or he would anyway, then just call us and we'll come and get you.
Did he take you up on that?
That's a good question. As I was saying that, I don't remember if he ever did. I'm going to have to ask Eric, did he ever call us and say, hey, could you come get me? He could have, and I don't remember. Honestly, I just can't remember. It's been a long time.
Sure. I feel like that would be my approach to parenting is, kind of understanding that they're going to do certain things and that I just want them to be safe in doing so. However, I'm not going to be providing alcohol for you in my home. That is illegal, and people get in trouble for it all the time. I feel like fewer parents were getting busted for this when I was growing up, but now you see news articles about it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to be careful. There seems to be, in that regard, stricter rules around this. I will say one funny story here. When the kids, I'd say Garrett was probably 16-ish, 17 maybe, and we took the kids on a family vacation to Hawaii. They each had a friend that they got to bring. So, we had our room. Our daughter had her room with her friend, and our son had his room with his buddy. And we find out, I don't know, the next day, the day after, somehow during some point of the vacation, our son had ordered up some room service, which amounted to like a 6-pack of beer or something.
Oh
He ordered
no.
it up to the room. And of course, whoever delivered it kind of looked at him a little sideways. Our son like slips him a 20 and shuts the door. So I guess he fessed this up to us within a day or two after. And we were just kind of like, at that point, I mean, what could you do? We
What are
just
you gonna
laughed.
do?
That was very clever of him. And I thought it was, I don't know. He was safe in his hotel room with a couple of
Yes,
beers
I
with
love the
his buddies.
ingenuity.
It was exactly. So I had to admire that. And maybe a lot of people would, I'm sure, consider that absolutely horrible parenting, but whatever. Our kids have grown up to be outstanding human beings. So whatever.
We're all horrible parents. We
We
are all
are.
horrible.
Yes. I think there's a lot
Let
of things
everybody else tell it. We're all horrible parents.
yeah, I reflect on a lot of things that I went, I probably should have done that differently. But there's you can't go back. So I look at what's been produced and how they are in the world now, and I'm like, okay, I guess all the good stuff outweighed what I feel like were the flaws or the mistakes.
I'm leaning on people like you for that type of hindsight because I am in the thick of it right now. And I'm just like, I don't know how I'm going to produce decent people out of this situation, but we're working on it. We are working on it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so drinking, that's one thing, not in my house, but if you find yourself in a situation, give me a call. I feel like I'm kind of on that page with you. My kids are way too young. This is not a decision that I have to make right now, but another one that's kind of in a similar bucket, sex.
Ooh.
If you feel like your teenager might be sexually active, is that happening under your roof, or are they going to get busted in a parking lot? What's the plan?
God, that's so awkward. I don't think so. I mean, that was okay. So, no, I'm trying to think of scenarios. All right. I would say, and I did not have this experience, so I'm only, this is just conjecture. Like, if you have a college kid, so they're away at college and they come home for a break, and they come home with a girlfriend or boyfriend that they've been dating for long enough period of time that they're probably at this age sleeping together. Then I would say I would consider that that's already happening, and they're older than 18 at this stage of the game. They're adults. So I would probably be fine with that. But if you just have, kids that are still living at home, like underage kids, no, you're not gonna, you're not gonna have your intimacy time with your current, love of your life or whatever in the house. It's not gonna happen. And when you're not under my care or you're not under my roof, then there's only so much you can do. Just all you can do is say, here's what the rules should be, and here's what the risks are, and you need to be really, really careful and have all of the obvious talk that we don't need to go into, that any person with common sense should understand. But in the house, that would just be really weird. I think
I would rather die than acknowledge that I am having sex or my child is having sex. None of this is happening. None of this is real. I want nothing to do with it. I'm terrified for the day that these things become issues in my parenting.
Well, if you have the rules laid down before you come up against the situation, hopefully you can avoid it. But yeah, I think that's just so much awkwardness that it's uncomfortable to
Isn't it weird?
Yeah, it is. It is. One of the things that I'm going to circle back to this real quick because I don't want to lose the thought. But when it comes to a thing that's really important to me about the cursing, I just didn't want to lose this. Hard and fast rule. At whatever age, if you're allowing your teenager to curse or whatever, I would say the thing is, what's never allowed is cursing, like calling each other curse words. That's not like you can't call your sibling anything that is considered a swear word, a curse word, foul language, nor by any circumstance call that, a parent that.
Right.
And I don't think a parent should ever use that on their children either. I think that is so out of bounds, like beyond out of bounds. So and you might have a 17-year-old that comes home and says, God, my science teacher was just such an ass today. I might let that go. I mean, ass, is it really, whatever. I don't really put that into the category of like a pretty serious curse word.
Right.
I would let that go, because if they're that upset that they're actually calling, their science teacher or whatever, an ass, then they probably are feeling pretty upset about something, and it opens the door to having a conversation. So
Right.
I would let that go, but under no circumstance would my kids or my family be allowed to call each other curse words.
I think at that point, it's not an issue of cursing. It's an issue of being disrespectful.
Exactly.
That's a different case,
And
different situation.
Yes. And speaking of disrespectful, I call the word whatever, I put that in the same category. And this is another story when my son and his friend were at the house one day in the kitchen. And it was, he was probably about 15, 16-ish. And I don't remember what the conversation was, but my response was something like, that he needed to do, that he wasn't crazy about doing. And I got the old whatever. And that put me over. And I said, oh, no. Here's why you don't say that. Because saying whatever with that kind of attitude in that context, like dismissive, is exactly the same as saying fuck you or fuck off. So that wasn't allowed either. You want to say that with your friends, whatever. But in that context, when parents allow kids to say that to them in that dismissive, disrespectful way, it's the exact same thing as going, fuck off. I don't give a shit what you're saying. So that's not allowed either.
I haven't gotten to that point yet. We haven't had that problem yet either.
You will.
Two little girls.
Now,
it's coming. I feel like it's coming.
Now you're armed.
Oh my goodness. Well, recently my kids have been talking about, and this is going to kind of veer off into a religious type of thing too. Recently my kids have been talking about wanting to be baptized, and the churches where they attended when they were a little bit younger, this wasn't like you're baptized when you're an infant type of deal. It's a choice that you make at some point in your life. And so it's not uncommon for kids about their age in this particular religion to be baptized. It's a submersive thing in the church, usually before the congregation. And so raising them in church when they were very small, I knew, of course, one day they'd want to be baptized. I was baptized when I was a little bit older than they are. And so we expected this. But I don't go to church anymore. And in fact, there's a man who lives in my home with me who's not my husband. And I'm feeling a little conflicted about this. And I'm actually walking through some church hurt, which is a phrase we'll get into. Probably it'll be a whole episode on its own. But I'm like, what do I do? How do I handle this?
Okay. So why do they say they want to be baptized?
So they are still very interested in attending church. And because we have moved to a new city in the last few months, that's the reason why we're not going to church right now. I've made no effort, though, to find us a church. It's not on my radar at this moment. And so they're still interested. They're actually, they did go to like a summer camp, church related, over the summer. They are involved in like a small group with some of their friends that meets weekly, and they tell me all the time the good news about the Lord. So they're still, and we laid that foundation. Their father and I laid that foundation, and we fully intended to raise them in church.
Okay.
It's just our lives went a
Okay.
different direction, and I don't know. I don't know what to do with this now.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, I mean, what would I, I guess first I'd like to know, what does that mean to them? Do they know what for them? If you said, what does it mean to you to be baptized? How do you think they would respond? Have you asked them?
We have talked about this. They say that they want to follow Jesus for all of their lives, which is the
Okay.
correct answer. That's what happens.
Uh-huh.
That's
Right.
why you get baptized.
So, do you think that if do they know, or do you agree that if they don't get baptized, they can still follow Jesus the rest of their lives?
We have talked about that.
Okay.
I
And
think for whatever reason, it's important to them, both of them.
okay, so they know that that's still a possibility. That
Hmm.
if you don't get baptized, you still
Right.
have the freedom and the ability to follow Jesus if you want.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. And so it's somehow it's meaningful to them. And what would your reservations then be to not? Why
Well,
would
the most obvious one, and this is probably a little silly, but it goes back to church hurt. I don't belong to a church. So
uh
where are we getting you baptized? Are we going to go as guests and get baptized and then not come back again? I don't think
mm,
many churches do it that way.
okay.
I did kind of toss around the idea when they were born, we were members of a church, and that church doesn't exist anymore.
Hmm.
But the pastor, I believe I would still be able to reach him. So perhaps he would baptize my children in a body of water. That's
Hmm.
maybe
Okay.
an option, but I don't know. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a tricky one, because you were brought up in the church, and you are rethinking about how you want to move forward, right, with your spirituality or your religious beliefs, right? So you're
Right.
kind of in a transition of figuring out what is a good fit for you moving forward. Is that fair to
Right.
say? Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay. Okay. So, but like you said, you've laid this groundwork for them, and they're still feeling kind of excited about staying on that path.
Hmm. And I'm okay with that. I
Mhm.
really am. And I don't, maybe one day I'll find myself attending church regularly, but based on the circumstances of what I've been through in the recent years relating to church and our friends at church and kind of the influence that that culture had on my life, I'm not comfortable right now
Mhm. Okay.
with it.
Okay, for you. Is that what you
Yes.
mean? Okay. But you're comfortable with that same doctrine for them?
I would be okay with it, but that is something I've thought about is what is this
Mhm.
to my children?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. You're questioning. And to me, questioning always makes sense. I
I
think
also acknowledge that children are too young for questioning, and so I'm kind of questioning on their behalf.
yes, because they are like little sponges just soaking up everything.
Hmm.
So I think you're wise to question. Um, if you feel like maybe it is something where you talk with them and you say that this is something that you still want to do for them or with them, but you need a little more time to find what you feel is the most, I don't know, spiritually healthy fit for you.
Right.
So maybe you just need some more time to look around a little bit more, see what's available, and find something that you feel a lot more comfortable with that resonates with you, and then sort of, bring them along in that manner. That, I mean, again, I don't have the answer for you, but I think blindly moving ahead when you're uncomfortable with something doesn't seem like the best thing to do. But I would just be careful that, you just want to make sure that you still foster that sense of spirit that they have, that they want that connection and they want to have some sort of religion or spiritual you know, doctrine or tenets or something in their lives. And I think that's really good, because I think, if you don't have that, it's a foundation that causes people to really feel alone in the world when they don't have that. So,
Right.
you know, I'm all about figuring out what that is for you, and then maybe bring them along in that way. And meanwhile, just tell them, I support that, and I'd like to make that happen for you, but mom needs to find the right fit. So keep doing what you're doing so that you keep feeding that part of their desire, but maybe just take some time then to find something. And you might find something if you put some effort into looking around that you really like, that resonates really well with you.
I've also tried to kind of remove myself from the immediate situation and say, if I'm okay, of course, if they want to follow Jesus, I hope they do follow the teachings of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'm okay with the baptism. I've been baptized. I'm fine with that. It's me, and I don't want my discomfort to affect their spiritual growth,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that ends up being for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm struggling with that. And I think that's why I've been more open to letting them go to their small group. It gives them something without me having to be the single mom sitting in a Baptist church.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of options out there. There's more than just a Baptist church. There are so many. There's non-denominational churches. There's a lot to choose from, and you are probably in an area where you have some variety to pick from. Yes. So,
Maybe.
do a little exploring. It might be fun. Yeah. So, but keep nurturing, and you know what? Maybe until you find that right fit, maybe for you as their mother and wanting to keep, continue to nurture that with them, then you get some storybooks, or find some programs that you can, they can watch, or you can read to them to continue to foster that.
If you are looking for a reference point for your children to have kind of their morality rooted in something, and it's
Mhm.
not going to be religion, where else can we look? Maybe that's a silly question, but I think given, my upbringing and what I've seen a lot in my region of the country,
Mhm.
church just seems like between church and like fear of your parents, healthy fear, not wanting
Mhm.
to disappoint your parents. Those are kind of the things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense for kids?
Well, I think you have to have some sort of a moral compass that you instill in them. And you don't need a church to tell you what that is. I mean, being a moral person, if you just boil it down to the basics, and by the way, those basic tenets of morality usually run across almost all religions. Once you boil down all the doctrine and all the stuff, it comes down to being a good human. And how do you as a parent, every normal, healthy, emotionally healthy person knows how to be a good human. So that's, your moral compass. You don't need a church to tell you what that is and tell you how to teach that to your kids. Morals and values are fundamentals, are pretty easy. You don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, you don't hurt people. Don't do things to other people that you wouldn't have done to yourself. I mean, it's pretty basic. They stand the test of time. So, having a list, I guess, if you need one, of what that means and what those are to you, and then making sure that you are instilling those morals and values into your kids. You can do that. You don't need a book or a religion to tell you what that is.
I like that a lot. I do. We do have one rule in my home, and I always say there's only one rule because there is. Because if you follow this rule, you're generally going to stay out of other trouble as well. Our
Mm-hmm.
rule is that you don't lie.
Mm.
So everyone is licensed to make some mistakes here and there, but when I ask you about it, you're not lying to me.
Mm-hmm.
We don't
Yeah.
lie in my house. I
Yeah.
feel as they get a little bit older, we may have other rules, but
Sure.
don't lie. I
Yeah.
don't need a curfew if you're honest with me about where you're going.
Mm. Yeah, maybe you might change your mind when they are driving age, but and when they're out on their first dates, but you might need
Yikes.
a curfew.
Yeah, don't be super honest. I don't need
Yeah,
to know about the
you
dates.
you allow yourself the ability to be fluid on a few things and change things, but lying that's a good one. That's a basic tenet and uh, a good rule for just being a good human. But it's the same thing, lying, cheating, stealing, swearing at your parents.
Mine are going to get baptized and then come up saying, shit, that was cold. Like that's who we are at this point.
Yeah, so I would kind of maybe even make a little list. It's a good thing this could be incorporated into creating a family vision and mission statement, which is something that I've talked to other clients that have kids about in the past. Just getting everyone on the same page. You're part of a unit, so it's sort of like, okay, we're a unit, we're a team, and here's our vision as a family, and figure out what that is. Here's our mission, figure out what that is, and then kind of an addendum to that, if you will, can be here are our morals and values. And you could sit down and have this great little family meeting, and they can be involved and contribute to that, and make your list so that everyone knows. Because when one member of the family goes out and into the world to do anything, you are representing the whole family. So it's kind of important, and it's a cool thing to have this sort of cohesive message that everyone is aware of, just like a company that operates at a high level does. So everyone knows what we stand for, right?
I love that idea and letting them be a part of crafting that as well. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yes. Yes. So you explain to them what a vision is and what's the difference between a vision and a mission. And then we talk about, okay, let's make our list of morals and values, and then you let them be part of that. And so they feel like, they have a say too, and you respect them enough as tiny people. They're old enough to understand these things and contribute, and they're much more willing to help uphold each other when everyone knows what it is, to the
I
uphold
love
each other
that.
to those things. Yeah, try that.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit.
All right.
Grandparents, meaning my parents
Mm-hmm.
and their other grandparents. I will say my kids have wonderful grandparents, and they are youthful grandparents, and they are very involved with my kids, as much as they can be given distance. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes this is just a thing, I think. I bet everybody has this situation. Sometimes grandparents just want to say certain things or challenge the parenting in certain ways. And my approach to that has always been not saying anything to those grandparents, but just correcting my kids when they come home and say, Grandma said you do too much of this, or Grandma said that when you were little, you did this and this and this, and we're doing it wrong. I just say, look,
Mm-hmm.
times have changed. I'm in charge. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How do we deal with grandparents who want to try to parent my children differently than I do?
Yeah. So I guess that is, I was fortunate that I had a wonderful grandmother that I spent a lot of time with, and there were no issues there. And then our kids had wonderful grandparents on both sides, and we never really bumped into any issues there at all. But I do know from your example and other people's that uh, a lot of times boundaries get crossed, and they do have some of these issues. So I think um, you know if it's I think you've really got to choose your battle, so to speak, right? Minor things, whatever. Is it really going to change the course of their lives or their character traits? I mean, if it's minor, I wouldn't make a big deal out of minor things. But if it's something that is really important to you and it's very counter to something, then you kind of have to, we're back to communicate. You have to, communicate your boundaries to your parents and say, you know, this doesn't work for us in our family at this day and age. So please refrain from, whatever it is your issue is. And, the good thing about having kids that are your age is you can ask them, as you've probably done. That's how you know this, what they talked about and what they did. Basically debrief after a visit with the grandparents. And then if there's something that comes up that you disagree with, well, then you have the talk with them. And the thing is, you're the authority, and you get to say, I'm doing things my way now because I'm the mommy. Back then, your grandma was the mommy and she got to do things her way, or grandpa was my dad, and they got to do things their way. But now you have me and you have your dad, and this is how we do things. And someday when you're older and you get to be the mommy, then you're going to get to do things your way too. Everyone has their turn, so to speak, if you choose to become a parent, to do things your way. So, things change. Again, back to things just change. We don't do things the same. Some things we do because some things are part of, again, back to, there's just a moral fabric that doesn't change. There are certain values that shouldn't and don't change. But other things, traditions, rituals, behaviors, I did it differently, whatever. Those things, if they're not important, then who gives a shit? But if they are, then you have to, say, but this is how it is now. My great-great-grandmother churned butter. I don't have to churn butter now. I can go to the store and buy it. I don't even have to go to the store. I can have it delivered. Things change. Does it really matter? No, do you need to churn butter because that's the way great granny did it?
I would
No.
rather pass away than churn my own butter.
Okay. So, I made my own butter once and it was really easy, by the way. Now, do I want to do that on a regular basis? And did I have to churn it? No, because we have great things called blenders and beaters and all that stuff to do the work for us. Back to the washing machines. We don't have to do that much work and hard labor. We have amazing conveniences in life now. So, yeah, just, call the shots that matter and work on that.
Yeah, that's always been my approach, is to just kind of correct it with my children. But if it's not a big deal, I'm not going to mention it to my parents, or certainly not to my in-laws. I just, kids will tell you. So they'll come home and say, so and so said such and such. And I'll say, okay, well, let me reel this back in for just a moment.
Yeah.
So I do. It hasn't been a big issue in my life. So I think that's a pretty good way to wrap this one up, Loree.
All right. Well, that was really interesting. That was fun. There's a lot going on there that, I didn't really think about a lot of those things when I was in the thick of it. And now that you bring it up, and in hindsight, there are a lot of things, and there's a lot of things to be more aware of now that we were not so aware of when I was raising my kids. So good stuff. One last thing I will say before we wrap about the alcohol situation. Is just, it's not just about, just keeping in mind, you guys, that it's not just about, oh, am I setting a good example? Is my kid going to end up being an alcoholic, or, going completely the other way, depending on what they see me doing or not doing. There's that. But then there's just the other basic health thing. So, the teenage brain is still in development. That brain is still developing until they're like 20 or 21 years old. And that's a really critical time. So alcohol, it can interfere with that. It can interfere with the processes. It can lead, if they start doing that on a regular basis, to like long-term cognitive impairments and maybe issues with memory, attention, decision making, some basic stuff that would happen to adults that are like overindulging too. But it can obviously also lead to risky behavior.
Mhm.
lowers your inhibitions. It definitely impairs judgment. So thinking about those other aspects of allowing or being too permissive around that, there's all, you increase the potential for addiction. And essentially alcohol is just a toxin. It's a toxin to everyone's brain. I don't care how old you are, it just is. So you have to hopefully be old enough, mature enough, responsible enough that if you are going to choose to do it, at least you're making an informed decision. You know and understand the risks. And then if you're still going to indulge, at least you're not doing it out of ignorance. You know what you're doing. So that was just, yeah, something I wanted to put a pin in too, because we kind of skated over that part.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, so I think everyone, it's just really, remember to be, when it comes to this kind of thing, be the authority, but be mindful of what you're modeling. I mean, your kids are influenced more by your behavior than your words. And that's something that we've always been told that, when the whole do as I say and not as I do concept is complete nonsense. It does not work. So make sure that what you are actually doing aligns with what you're preaching. So ask yourself often, am I being who I'm trying to teach them to be? All right. And if you want to give your kids an edge in understanding the power of their own mindset, their beliefs, and their attitudes, then I would encourage you to go check out the TLC course created exactly for the teenage mind. It's tlccourse.com. And if you want to find out any more about coaching with me, just go over to loreebischoff.com.
We are on social media platforms. Come find us. It's We're Talking Shift. It's Loree Bischoff, and I am Lauren, and we will catch you next time for We're Talking Shift.
All right, everyone, go make some epic shift happen. See you next time.